Okay, so let's get going into our presentation here. This is called Converting Mass Tort Leads. This is a really hot topic right now that we actually go over with a lot of firms that we're working with, as well as people calling in about how the process works to get going. So I'm going to go ahead and charge into here. Feel free to chat in your questions as we go. And what I'll do is get started right now. And so here we go. So converting mass tort leads. I think the very first thing we should do is just kind of touch on the business of mass torts and what that really looks like in that kind of format. I'm going to go into basics here because it's not specifically about converting intake, but does talk about things a little bit. So the general business strategy for any business, it doesn't matter if you're Ford or you're Coca-Cola, or basically you're a law firm. You have your company, which is a product that typically is you as a law firm. Then you have marketing and you have sales. When those three things are really operated correctly and everything is working correctly, then basically what you usually have is a successful business. Now this is macro, this is just a high view of what a business really looks like, but you need all three of those things to really be focused on. In a law firm, basically, the mass tort business strategy really looks like this. You have the law firm, and really you have the mass tort or the litigation you're looking at, and then you have the effective marketing, which you may be using, which we'll get into those different types here shortly. And then what you have is 24/7 intake and contract services, which really becomes your sales. And that basically, when those things are all working together, then you also have a strategy that works. So let's just talk about that a little bit. Today, what we're talking about when we talk about mass torts are really even class actions. And we look at all the different types that are out there. We look at product liability, the ones that have been hot over the last year: Roundup, Zantec, hernia mesh, IBC filter, 3N earplugs, Takata airbags, over the long past, but just give you some other different types of things that are out there. And then basically, quite a few more that are popping up right now. Almiron, PFAS, which is basically out there as well. And then you have other things like the disasters, like you have the fires in California that were actually the mass torts. You have floods that ended up being mass torts. You have these employment law litigations over mass class actions, employment law, and basically the plaintiffs in that situation not being treated by the local laws in those class actions. You have frauds where you have labeling issues. One of those that actually exists is currently with Zantec, where Zantec not only does the drug create problems, but also it was advertised incorrectly, so they have a fraud issue there. They have financial insecurities that exist, and then now we have business interruption and these bad faith insurance things where they're not covering people's business interruption or paying out due to COVID-19. So these are a lot of those all combined. We're going to talk about how we actually convert these leads regardless of what type of case it is as we get going. So when we basically go to mass torts process, let's just talk about the process, because some people say, well, how does this all work if we're just doing the mass torts? And this is just a very high view. This is not a whole presentation about how to get into the nuts and bolts of this, but this is it. So really the mass tort steps in the go-to-market strategy is, first of all, you have to choose a litigation selection. It has to be something like right now you may choose Zantec, or you may do some class action of some type. And then you have to have budgets that are associated. What are the budgets that you're going to be spending to actually acquire those types of cases? And either you're backing into that budget by how many cases you want, or you just have a finite number, like $50,000, I want to spend to get cases. What should I do? Then you have your firm alone, meaning that you're going to be taking these cases and trying them yourself, or you're going to be doing co-counsel. Most of the time, co-counsel basically is leadership, the people in leadership position, where you're doing the marketing and you're getting the cases signed, and then you're sending it out to co-counsel, and they're generally doing the rest. It doesn't always work like that, but it's the way that it works a lot of times. We work with a lot of the leadership, so if you ever need to talk about us with that, we can talk to you later about that. Then you have to define what is your marketing going to be. And there's multiple ways to market to get leads, from local things that you may be doing, as well as, social media and high volume digital and web, TV, radio, billboards, whatever, okay? And then once you have the leads flowing, you have to have intake screening, qualifying, and retaining, which is mainly what we're talking about, which is converting those leads. And then after you get those cases signed, if you are handling those cases yourself, or even if co-counsel is, you have med records and you have med review. And that's what happens next to basically validate those cases, or really actually invalidate and disqualify them at a deeper level there. Then those cases are filed in the courts, either state courts or basically federal courts. And then you have basically, you end up with this docket, and there's an evaluation that goes with whatever this docket's worth based upon the types of injuries you get. And sometimes there's financing. That last piece we're not going to talk about at all. It's a whole conversation by itself, and we're not going to touch on that because they've already been converted from being a lead into basically a plaintiff and a client for you. So let's dive into some deeper things. Marketing. Should your marketing be branded versus not branded? So how you interact with the lead depends on how they came to know about your existence and how you receive their information. So let's talk about offline advertising. So offline advertising, traditional advertising, TV, radio, billboards, in the mass tort or class action world, it's mainly TV and radio, and it reaches a wide audience that may know nothing other than the fact that they have a problem with advertising. So somebody sees an ad, and they say, oh, I'm hurt or I have that problem. I believe it might be from that, but I'm going to find out. So I'm going to call. And that call, that lead goes someplace. Either goes to the law firm or may go to an intake center like us, but that's how that gets handled. Or somebody sees the ad and they say, my loved one is hurt or sick, and I believe it could be from that. I'm going to check it out. And they respond to the ad, and that could be there. So now let's talk about basically the digital side. So online and advertising and digital, which is the huge bust lately, is this. Social media may or may not be familiar with your company or brand in the way it's advertised. There's detail filters that allow marketing focus and initial screening on the actual lead itself before it actually comes in. Then organic that you may be getting is coming to your website, which is leads will need to have expressed some interest in the form by typing a search query of some type. Then there's pay per click. Found your call to action intriguing enough to investigate, unlikely to know much about the firm or why they should choose that firm. They may be lead nurturing before they want to get on a call, and that could be even happening by the ad itself or the landing page. And then there's pay per call, which is like pay per click, except the client only pays if a phone call is made. A law firm is pay for that, and usually over a certain time distance. And then calling from the internet means they prefer talking to humans. They'd rather actually engage versus just say, you engage with me after I send a form or a web submission. All of these are being used in all different aspects right now, but all of them require leads to be responded to. So the response is really based on the ad. In branded advertising, it's focused on the litigation and the branding of the law firm. So this is really what a law firm, such as yourselves, may be actually trying to double dip and say, look, I'm going to advertise, let's say, for Roundup or Zantac, and I'm going to advertise in my local area, and I'm going to put it under my brand. So basically, I'm not just advertising for the mass tort itself, but I also want to brand my law firm on the personal injury side, because maybe I can actually get some cases there from the branding that come into personal injury, motor vehicle accident, premises liability, whatever. Now, this may be required also that it has to be branded on certain state bar requirements, which is something you probably already know, and it does require you to put branding on. There are several states that do require this if you're doing that. But a lot of times, basically, with mass torts and or class actions, when they're in federal courts, you can actually advertise nationally and not have to be barred in every single state, and you're not under the same bar requirements. A lot of times you do have to check with the ethics attorney about how you're advertising and the ad itself, but I would say the majority of advertising done in mass torts today is not branded ads. But there's also, I'm seeing a switch with that lately. We're seeing more branded ads. So that's state, local, or national advertising use. Unbranded ads basically are generally national advertising, not focused on the branding law firms, but to elicit a response to an ad only. Now, the reason why this is used so often is because you can actually pipe into big advertising firms that are advertising nationally and get your spend into a huge bucket so you can get basically these ads and actually get the results from these leads for less cost. Now, this is here basically to elicit a response to the ad only, no brand, and it really just varies on the strategy of you as a law firm and what you want to do. Do you want to file in the state court? You want to file them in, county courts? You want to file them basically in federal courts and be part of the MDL with a multi-district litigation. This is typical for mass tort litigation uses, these ads being national and unbranded, but they don't have to be. So now let's talk about the cost per acquisition, or what is widely known as your CPA. This is, you look at your campaign budget, you look at the lead flow, and that determines the staff and the bandwidth that is needed to be able to respond to all the leads that are going to flow. This is not always the simplest thing to do, but the fact is it's really, really key to make sure you're not losing leads. So let's say you take a lead source. And the lead source today, basically, that you're going to go all in for a mass tort. You're going to advertise for TV, radio, and digital all at once. And so the TV and radio is going to require basically 24/7, 365 inbound instant response. And I mean, you have to be on the call basically and have around the clock staffing and the correct bandwidth for this. Otherwise, TV is a lot of wasted leads. So what happens basically, all the calls need to really be picked up in around 3 rings or less. That's where you need to be. For TV and radio, the times that these are advertised are weekends, night times, mornings, holidays, all those times. This is an unusually hard thing for law firms to staff for themselves personally with their own intake team. Because how do you do this? How do you manage a 24/7 staff that's inbound and doing this? And how can they be professional? What if a call comes in at 11 o'clock at night and then 7 o'clock in the morning on the weekend and then 3 o'clock in the afternoon on Saturday and then 1 p.m. on Sunday, then 10 p.m. on Sunday night. So you really have to have an intake team that's focused to do this. Now, web leads are different because web leads require immediate outbound text, immediate calls, and emails with follow-ups and scheduled tasking. That requires software as well. We'll talk about that more. This is minimal lead loss and highest conversions, okay? So the web leads require the immediate outbound text. How do you immediately outbound a web lead coming in 24/7 as well? Well, that requires some sort of software with automation where the text is going out saying, thank you for inquiring about, let's say, your Zantec. We do want to talk to you about your lead. We're going to be calling you. So what happens is the text goes out, letting them know you're going to call them. That keeps them from actually searching on other people's websites. And then you call them. But that also has to be a 24/7 feature. You can receive a lead at 8 p.m. at night and just send a text out. And you can call them tomorrow. The conversions just die. And that means the marketing prices go up. So mixing media sources requires individual campaign sourcing, meaning that basically you're tracking each source. Let's say you're tracking the radio and how it's performing, the TV, how it's performing, the digital news, how you're performing. And it could be multiple vendors too. Then you're tracking each one of those, know how they're performing. And then you're measuring and receiving reports to make sure you know where your money's going and which one's converting. Because you may not want to continue with one after a couple of weeks or even a week because it's just failing. And you want to make sure that you actually have that. But you can't measure it unless you're reacting to it now. Otherwise, all the numbers for measuring become fuzzy. Meaning that if you're getting leads after hours and you're measuring them all after hours, it's almost like, well, they're not all the same. Not all leads are equal. And so that's one of the things you have to take a look at. Spanish-speaking adds basically another unique team and approach. Now, we happen to have a full Spanish team as well as English-speaking. But there's a cultural thing that goes on, and the length of call generally is longer. This type of client also can be even more engaging in the conversation, and basically the flow of Spanish back and forth in the language basically can take a little bit longer as you're engaging with them. And that's basically, you have to have a team that's fluent in Spanish, meaning that they can't be somebody that this is not the language of their heart to actually be able to convert these types of leads as well. Now let's talk about bandwidth. Now we've all dealt with bandwidth with our Wi-Fi at home, and it either works or it doesn't, especially now. We deal with this bandwidth basically at our offices, like do we have enough bandwidth to handle all of our computer systems? But it's no different really when you talk about bandwidth for your team handling leads based upon all the lead types and the flow. So it has to be right sized for the campaign, or it should be outsourced, otherwise you're losing all the marketing money. So let's just take the left funnel. And we're going to talk about how we've kind of tried to design our entire office. We have 55,000 square feet and 425 people doing nothing but actually taking leads for law firms and responding to them. But we have to basically staff correctly to make sure every single lead goes into the funnel and nothing's missed. Now, what people say is, I don't really care as long as I get 70% conversion, but you should care. Because if you look at the quote there, it says, we responded immediately to all 600 leads, which means all 600 leads went into our funnel. And we signed 140 out of 200 qualified leads for a 70% conversion. That's a yes. That's a win, basically, for you. Sometimes that 70% can be as high as 80% or 85%, depending on the ad and what the campaign is. But if it's not right, it looks like the funnel to the right, where basically all the leads are pouring into a funnel that's too small. And that funnel that's too small can either be your intake team at different hours of the day, or it could be somebody that you're outsourcing to. And what happens basically, you get the result where out of the 600 leads, we got 70 out of 100, and they're going to be saying 70% conversion, but the problem is you're not counting all the leads that are completely gone, right? So basically your intake team is so critical. We actually do a staffing adjustment, and we are moving our team every 15 minutes to make sure we're staffed overnight based upon projections that we have. It's a pretty complicated software we have to make sure that no leads are ever missed. So let's talk about intake versus marketing and the cost reality. The cost reality is basically is that really about 15 to 20% of your intake cost of the entire case, all right? And 80 to 85% is marketing costs. So what does this mean? That means that your cost per acquisition has physics associated to it, that if you mess with them, or if you fail in a certain area, meaning that if your intake does not work, if intake is being blown, it's extremely costly. Why? Because now the marketing cost increases. So if the intake is working, your marketing cost goes down over time because of the fact you're controlling every lead, and that acquisition number and return on investment is actually working for you. But if you blow the intake or you have a weak intake team, you have to spin through it with marketing. And that's where it gets extremely expensive. We've actually seen people that have come to us and they've asked us to repair this entire system. And the reason is because they've actually spent, and it could be the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And instead of getting a 70 to 80% conversion on the qualified leads, they're getting like 20 to 40%. And they've lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. There could be actual clients for them. So this is what it looks like. Let's just take the marketing cost example. I'm just trying to put a graphic to this. You know, if 10 to 15% of your cost is intake and 85 to 90% is spent on marketing, if you look over the example, if the typical cost per acquisition is $2,000, I wanted to use this number because a lot of mass torts kind of fall into this range, kind of in their midlife cycle. And if the marketing cost is $1,500 to $1,750 per case, and the intake retainer is $250 to the high side of $500 with really tight, strict kind of intakes. That means if you lose the lead and you lose it, you're off at $1,750 marketing cost if you lost it in intake. That's why intake is so critical to control the marketing spends and your campaign costs and then make it all work. So what do we see? My background comes from managing, I worked for a 80,000 person, $12 billion organization running sales in Los Angeles at one point. I worked for a $4 billion company with 25,000 employees. And what is the most unique thing I see in the legal market, which really stands alone here, is we see an awful lot of law firms basically not taking care of the intake, which is really their sales department, and making sure that's absolutely dialed in. And if it's not dialed in, outsourcing. And what happens basically is they're just pouring more and more money into market. And the cases cost more and more and more because they haven't fixed this issue. It's actually unique to this industry that we see this very much. I mean, you don't see this in too many industries where they don't match the business model with the marketing and the sales department, which is your intake team, and have it completely dialed. So if leads are flowing after hours, then your sales team's supposed to be taking them, or don't have leads come in after hours, which is not the most efficient way to run marketing and buy and purchase media. So let's talk about lead response. Timing and quality, how critical this is. So lead response is so critical because you need to know what your firm's average ring answer time is for calls. So what we know for sure, because we do millions of intakes per year, we've measured this data, that after 3 rings, the leads tend to go to abandoned calls and lost leads. Why? Well, after ring number 3, people get impatient on ring number 4. On ring number 5, they wonder if you're even working. Ring number 6, they're pretty sure you're not working, and they're not sure why you have these ads out there if you're not going to respond to them. So that's an inbound phone call. So you have to have an overflow system beyond 3 rings. Now, I'm talking about an overflow system basically that works within your law firm, that if you're taking intake during the day, and after 3 rings, basically, you don't pick up, and it just keeps ringing and ringing and ringing, or it goes to voice message, which is a killer for these type of leads. You want to have an overflow system where it goes to a live person to do the intake. That's how you basically keep your conversions high. And you need to know your hold times. So basically, over 15 seconds, we also know by measuring all the data, leads are going to turn into abandoned calls and lots of lost leads over 15 seconds. Why? Well, if I right now stop talking for 15 seconds, that's about 8 seconds. All right, already impatience is setting in. You get 15 seconds. That's it in today's world. So the overflow outsourcing after 3 moves of the message works best. What we mean by that, basically, what we have found, we've played with multiple different systems over the years to make this the most efficient, is that basically when it rings 3 rings and let's say it's going to your team, if they don't pick up, what you want to do is have a recorded message coming through saying, we're very interested in talking to your case. It could actually be even one of your lawyers that actually make this recording. We are promised we're going to be right with you in the next few seconds. And then it's ringing to an overflow company. That's what we do. And we basically answer that call. So it's 3 rings plus 15-second hold plus ringing to us. And that's the maximum time you get to maintain conversions. Anything. So if you're thinking about, do you know what your hold times are? You know, let's say if I called somebody the day, we actually called a law firm that was looking at our services, and they were 6-minute hold times. We just told them, there's nobody there. They're going to, most of the time, they're going to be gone. But even over 30 seconds and 45 seconds, you have an issue for conversion. You also need to know how fast your team responds to web leads. You have to be able to measure this. So web forums, landing pages, chat, it doesn't matter what it is. How fast is your team responding? And the best way to respond is the instant text. So if something comes through digital, you have a text that's customized for your law firm. We actually build these and customize for law firms. But that means automated, a text goes out. A web lead comes in, a text goes out. Now what the point of that is to freeze that person and that client with you. They put in a web submission. They got an immediate text back. The text basically says, we're very interested about talking to you about your case. We're going to call you in the next few minutes. Please stand by. That keeps them from filling out web form after web form after web form for other for other basically law firms, and locks you there. Then you have within 1 to 3 minutes, you have to have an outbound call, and that's what's ideal. And then lead loss is significant over 5 minutes. Well, how do we know that? Why are we just saying that? We talk to people all the time. They say, the web lead comes in 10 o'clock on Friday night. We ask them this question all the time when we're doing an evaluation, and they basically say, yeah, we call them next day or sometime that we can, sometimes on Monday. Well, this is what it looks like to you then. Slow response equals lower conversions. Why? Well, the odds of making contact decrease over 10 times in the first hour. This is a study that was done a while back by Inside Sales from MIT. But in the first hour, calling the same quantity of leads, they reached 12,700 people, but after 2 hours, it dropped to 1,190. That's all they could reach in the first 1 hour. That's all you get. But actually, it's actually even more critical than that. When you are dealing with people that have been injured, or they're calling about a medical problem, this becomes a different multiple. And it looks really more like this. The odds of making contact decrease over 5 times in the first 5 minutes. That means, look at people who are reaching the first minute, over 9,000, basically making those calls in 5 minutes. But after 10 minutes, look what it drops down to, 5 times. That's what can happen to your leads if you don't react. And if you cannot react internally, you got to figure out, well, how do I patch this? So when I'm doing a ton of web leads flowing into me, if I'm buying media from Torts or anything, how do I make sure I don't miss any of these things? And you want to figure out a way to patch them so all your marketing dollars stay at home. They stay with you and they don't go to other people. So the elements of responding to leads. This is interesting. This is a Harvard business study. And basically this says the short life of online sales leads. Firms that try contacting leads within 1 hour were nearly 7 times more likely to qualify the lead versus those who waited 2 hours. Here's the problem with this study, especially when it comes to mass tort or class actions. This only really measures if the people were 7 times more likely to contact them. What we have found is if you don't reach them in 3 to 5 minutes, all right, it doesn't, you basically may contact them, but they're going to say they've already signed another law. And that's the issue you have. So you really have the 1 to 5 minute mark. That's it, maximum with web leads coming in. And the key is just conversions all the time. Conversion controls your cost of marketing. And if it's over 5 minutes, often you'll reach them. You'll finally get to them in the first hour, but 1 hour is too long, and we know that for sure because we've measured these conversions. And reaction times also equal happy clients, meaning that basically, if you look at what happened here, this American Bar Association did this study basically about the law firm intake process. They said 3% of callers gave up before the phone was answered, which is, we see a lot. We actually think it's higher than that, but that's it. 11% of the calls lasted less than 10 seconds. 42% of the time, law firms took 3 or more days to respond to a lead, and lead reaction time is a competitive advantage for you. So if you respond right away to a web lead with a text and then a phone call, and if you pick up the calls in 3 minutes, and 3 rings are all under, and or you have an answering system that goes and rotates to somebody that'll pick it up, so you always have a live call happening within 20, 30 seconds. What happens basically is your clients are happy. Why? Because if you put your place of a client who could have been injured or is going through some sort of crisis or really wants to know what's going on, let's say it's Roundup or Zantac or Miranda or Tort, it doesn't really matter. What they want is just you to respond. If they're going to fill in the ad, they don't want to wait 3 days for you to respond. They're going to find somebody else. So if you respond, they're happy, and your conversion goes so much higher just because they can't believe that you actually responded that quick. And that's the way you respond, is your intake team is reacting as fast as possible with quality. So that potential solution would be the correct intake team structure within your own law firm, or you outsource it to somebody that can take care of it for you, or a combination of those two, which we do a lot and we work with people on. Here's the first impression to leads as well. Have you standardized how leads are greeted, meaning that it's important basically that the first impression, if you are going to respond immediately and take care of that issue, you must maintain a consistency with guidelines and monitoring, meaning that you really should be listening to the calls of your intake team. And not just a standard greeting, but it needs to be really calm. It needs to be empathetic. And we also know this, that multitasking staff weakens intake. So we see also within law firms, it's busy. Let's say a paralegal that usually takes a call, or any office person usually takes a call that's actually helping the lawyers prepare for a case that's going to court the next day, and they're all busy and they're rushing to answer and trying to figure out where's the time come to answer the calls and be in the right state of mind. So that pressure comes out in your attitude and your voice. You actually put out rushed impressions, like, it doesn't feel like you really want to help the people. That's their impression from their side. They can tell you're not patient, and the time of the intake and the quality of that intake is actually shortened. So that first impression really matters to conversions as well. And also, on the first impression, voicemail really makes a terrible first impression. The worst thing in the world is a brand new lead comes in for a mass tort, and the very first thing they do is an answering machine. Well, that's the very worst thing you could do. So this basically shows you are too busy or don't really care, or, it's nice you're advertising, but they're going to call somebody else, somebody wants to pick up the phone. So 35% of calls from an intake study that resulted in voicemail or no answer at all. I mean, and this is what we find, is a significant amount of people are doing. Now, not all law firms have this problem. A lot of them are very, very tight. They're just looking for other ways to get better. But when you add, if you take a look at what your law firm does during the day, it's way different when you pile in hundreds of leads and mass tort on top of that. It breaks down pretty quick. We also know that overflow, which we talked about before, voicemail, 15 seconds or less holds. Also, if that's built right, works really well to overflow out of those situations where you have capacity and abandonment. Remember, the intake is responsible for shaping the lead's understanding and their feelings about the law firm themselves, meaning the quality of the person on the phone, answering and being prompt, also about the litigation, and that's all handled through listening as well as empathy. So you need expert legal intake specialists, and you need an expert intake manager who's monitoring this the whole time. They really work together. You have to have that person. And always remember that intake is really sales. So your intake manager is really a sales manager, and you have to really kind of think about, man, am I structured like that at all? Do I even have the right people in all the places to make this happen all the time? And really take a look at that piece as well for staffing. Now let's talk about required intake skills. Now the skills that are needed to be a lawyer aren't the same as those needed to be an expert legal intake specialist. They're just not always the same thing. The mentality basically, now it doesn't mean that we haven't talked to lawyers that have a really good way of handling the calls, but at volume it's very difficult. So our training courses are weeks long with monitoring. I mean, if I could show you a picture of our training book, it's literally 8 inches thick that goes on for weeks with constant monitoring and training. And what we're covering is these things: empathy, legal terminology, knowledge of mass torts and litigations, whole training courses on the litigations, phone etiquette, call control, which means that when you talk to somebody about something that happened to them, you have to be able to get through the intake screening criteria without them telling a 45-minute story. Closing when you're actually trying to send out retainers, outbound calling, texting, and emailing skills, which means it's not just the phone skill, but as well as how to communicate if you're going to text somebody, as well as you're going to email them, and also how to use the software to do that. Follow up for web leads and calls that were not going to contact you or convert on the first call. Retainer execution with e-sign and correct walkthrough to the e-sign. Live transfer and call routing and appointment scheduling. It's significant. Each one of those are a module, and then we monitor those. So you have to think about, these are the required intake skills that you need to be able to react in this market for mass torts. So let's talk about qualifying leads, the screening criteria on the intake. Well, let's talk about how this really changes during these phases. So in pre-litigation, basically, we see a lot of, and I'll give you an example. When we looked at 3M earplugs last year, at the beginning of 2019, when that litigation started, the criteria was on the intakes we were receiving from law firms. We were taking these thousands of calls that were coming. It was about 4 questions long. And recently, we just met with a law firm, and they sent us over their intake. And we're getting closer to the end of this. We're probably in later stage litigation now. And that intake is 50 questions. They've learned more about the case, what questions to ask, and filter. So in pre-litigation, it's wide open and looser criteria on the intake, more cases. The litigation phase, ongoing knowledge drives the intake criteria. So all the communication in all these markets is driving what the intake should really now have. In late stage litigation, there's much tighter screening criteria, including more medical questions that are going on. And in the settlement phase, super tight screening with even more medical designed to handle short timelines before settlement or before trials, which is really critical. You reduce the medical review time with that intake, and you reduce the follow-up and medical review because of the time required to do those things. So you're trying to get a lot more of that information before it goes to med review and med records, because you want that to be a tight case that's being filed, because you're not going to have a whole lot of time to do all these reviews and get the information from the plaintiffs. You want to get that as quick as possible on the initial screening phone call with them. So dialing in the intake is critical. So you have to ask yourself, is your lead qualification process the same regardless of the time period? And it should not be. That's what the previous slide was showing. You need to use filters, or which is really the qualifying questions, to stop law firms from being overwhelmed with your non-quality cases. And that's really you. You just want to make sure you just don't end up with a pile of non-valued cases because the intake wasn't done right or adjusted over time. We have just, a vault full of intakes that we see all the time, and we see the criteria change constantly. So you really want to focus on cases that can generate revenue for the law firms, but really you want the best cases. So you want to customize intakes to each mass tort, tighten up and improve docket values. That's what it does with real cases. Free up your staff and management times by not getting a bunch of cases that really aren't worth anything, or you have to follow up with, which could have done in the intake, and being able to change the intake as needed as that litigation advances over time, and make sure you're dialing in the intake constantly. So that being nimble is big. It's big for us. We actually get called all the time. So we could be running, like we already saw this with Zantec from the very beginning, and we watched basic intakes come out, more complicated intakes come out, and basically it tighten up. But we also see this with Roundup. We saw this with Talc. We saw this with 3M, all of them. Hernia mesh, same thing. So those are things you need to think about. So converting qualified leads to client on the initial contact, you need the ability to, with both expert intake agents and software. So let's just talk about what it takes to be able to do this. First of all, this is what we know. When it comes to lead response, we know that this is really what matters. 1, instant response to all leads 24/7, 365. Right? Easy to say, hard to do. 2, once you have responded and you have them and you're talking to them, stop them from shopping with your technology and 24/7 live intake, meaning that needs to be dialed in. So I think that what we're talking about here is this magic formula. Now, I'll say this, but we're going to talk about really the building of this in a company as well as a law firm. So 24/7 inbound calls are answered in 3 rings or less with hold times of under 15 seconds if they even go to hold. I mean, you don't want them going to hold at all, but if they have to go to hold, not over 15 seconds, always. Web leads require instant outbound text. That includes automation, meaning that there's no way somebody can sit there with hundreds of leads flowing in or even 50 leads and text everybody all the time and be immediate. Then immediate calls and emails. And what you would want to do with those is do a varied time of day if you don't reach them. Meaning that if the lead came in at 10 o'clock, then your system automatically will notify you, and you will actually at 6 p.m. or through automation will do it at 6 p.m. At night, you'll follow up with them again, and you'll do that multiple attempts. Why? Well, we measured millions of web leads, and we found that if you immediately call people, even text them, you're only going to get them on the call immediately 37 to 40% of the time. But if you do multiple attempts and you do varied times a day and weekends and nights, that jumps to about 75 to 80% into live intake, which is a game changer in what your ROI and your return on investment will be in the marketing budget you spend by just properly designing your intake. And that goal is just to convert them from that live intake into a signed client. How do you do this though? I mean, it's easier to say than to actually do it because you need a lot of technology wrapped around this. So the goal for the initial call is to disqualify or convert, meaning be responsive and build rapport. That's a structured intake, but you have to maintain call control, meaning that you really have to build the intake screening criteria so you don't ask open-ended questions that go on forever. That is easier to do with personal injury than it is with mass tort on a case where you let them want to talk about their case. But with mass tort, you need to be able to get through the constant flow of leads and maintain call control. And then once you have them on the call, you need to qualify or disqualify the lead based upon the criteria that you may have. That qualify or disqualify could be medical questions. It almost always includes the statute of limitations as well as where they're located. But there's just basically a design. We actually coach on this and kind of help people to actually build the right intake to convert the highest. For qualified leads, then do not break contact or just send a retainer, which means that if they qualify, the next step you're going to do is keep them on the call. You're going to stay on the phone call, and you're going to text the retainer for e-sign and any explanations if they have questions. That is the #1 highest conversions. Do not break contact, text for e-sign to qualify leads. Second step would be emailing retainer for e-sign. That's #2 for conversions. And then 3, there's a lot of cases, we run into this a lot with hernia mesh. Anytime you have a more aged group of plaintiffs that you're dealing with, you generally sometimes can have a fall off in how many people technically want to communicate with text or email for multiple reasons. So what we find is that you have to have mailing packets. That's really necessary for those not technically savvy. That becomes the #3 highest conversions. If you take that out and say, we're not going to mail, we're just going to do digital, you will convert, but you do convert a lot more by mailing packets to those people that need that as well. That really fills in the spot to round out all your conversions. And then schedule a follow-up time if necessary. As a caveat, I will say, it happened to be like in a certain demographic of people, which would happen to be the military for 3M earplugs. Mailing packets was almost not necessary at all. Almost everybody would e-sign, and it became almost irrelevant to do that. And also the cost structures of those campaigns made more sense to almost do digital. Almost everything else requires some mailing. And then schedule a follow-up time if necessary if they will not sign. So if you sent the contract and they will not sign, you need to have a tracking and tasking system, which we'll talk about more. So converting qualified leads requires live lead response 24/7, 365. We've talked of that, beat that into the ground at this point. Inbound calls answered in #3 rings. After 3 rings, abandon rate, lead loss increases. Got to have a hold system in place as well. Outbound instant text with outbound calls and emails in 1 to 3 minutes for web leads. You have to be able to confidently answer potential objections or questions. Demand to talk to a lawyer before signing. You have to have a program in place if they demand to talk to a lawyer before signing, where you have some sort of a strategy to be able to deal with people like that, because most of the time they sign. And if you don't have a strategy, you're just walking from that. However, in super high volume cases where, it could be 100, 200, 300 leads a day or even 1,000 leads a day we've seen, that's almost impossible. So you have to kind of just look at the mass tort and then dial in. That's what we do. But for talc or even Roundup, if they demand to talk to basically an attorney before signing, you should have somebody very online to and then using probing questions to find out why the caller is hesitating to sign, to work through those issues, and then build this all into your system, constant monitoring. So, converting qualified leads. What do you do if your lead doesn't convert on the first call? Well, what system do you have to track leads? And you have to have a software system of some type. It's not being written down on a piece of paper if it's internally. And then what system do you have to schedule and automate follow-up tasks? Meaning that if basically they won't sign or convert on the first call, and they're requesting basically a follow-up or a task, or they won't even commit to that, your system has to task you to do the follow-up. And then you have to contact them. And it's the same way you'd reach out to them like they were a new lead. You would text them, then hey, we're getting ready to call you. Then you'd actually call them. Tell them you're going to call them. And then emails as well. And then you have to have an option basically for mailing packets that are sent but not signed too. So if you actually send a mailed packet out, then you have to have a tracking mechanism. We have a pretty complicated software system that actually does this, but we know when it arrives on somebody's front door, and when it arrives in their front door, we call them and walk them through the packet. That's the ideal. So that's tracking the mail, tasking follow-up when it does arrive, and then mailing packets for media litigation dramatically improves the conversions, usually about 15% you can improve them. And then software integration, the tracking, the automatic tasking, and the varied times a day for and different types of reaches, all that does is raise your conversions, doing all of these things. So what else? On converting qualified leads, it is basically easier to maintain standards with an in-house intake specialist. Is it really easy to do it internally? It depends. Meaning we've seen some people that have 30 or 40 people that are really good at doing this, but they're really watching critically what happens, during times when they're out of office or after hours. But you have to really talk about the system you have to track and task these leads. In-house intake can have major bandwidth issues. We basically see this a lot. I mean, no matter what, we just see bandwidth issues because it can happen anytime. When people arrive in the morning, there's a bandwidth issue. When they leave during the day, over lunch times, over holidays, over night times, over weekends, all of that. It's amplified when high volume results in inbound web lead calls or overflow from mass tort marketing. And that is even worse at night times, early mornings, weekends, and holidays. That they would actually have more problems and more lost leads. So what software system do you have to schedule and automate follow-up tasks? You need an immediate lead reaction time for inbound and outbound. To do that 24/7 for most law firms is basically, we find, almost impossible, because it doesn't make financial sense, especially when you're darting in and out of mass torts with different budgets and campaigns, to staff for that and then have all these people left over for the staff. It's better basically to look for a different solution than that. So if you're going to outsource their legal intake call center, they must have also the staffing, the bandwidth, the solutions, the processes, the redundancies, the tendencies to basically already in place as well. They have to have all of these issues fixed if you're going to outsource to them. And the mass tort and class action intake team is trained differently than standard PI. And it really has to do with hours, time, software to make sure everything's put together the right. So let's talk about this. Who are you marketing for? And marketing for you. Now we're saying this to you because of the fact you really internally should really be honest and say, who am I marketing? Why? Because of this. Superb intake equals a strong marketing return on an investment. So let's talk about things that happen to people. A lack of internal or external outsourced bandwidth results in lead loss, period. Slow lead response times results in lead loss or lower conversion. Low intake quality results in lead loss or lower conversion. Weak tracking and tasking systems results in lower conversion. Inadequate intake managers always cause lower conversions because nobody's managing the team. And then weak intake screening criteria leads to much higher client fallout or a reduced docket values. So look at all those things and say, where are we at internally? And then who are you marketing for? Well, poor intake leads to basically what? You're really technically marketing for another law firm if you don't pick up the lead. So if you don't immediately respond to leads and have adequate expert intake managers and the right bandwidth, you're going to basically, you've actually created a lead that has created interest. And if you don't respond, they're going to keep going and you're now marketing for other law firms. Nothing should make you more irritated than this, that you're spending capital to market for other law firms. Your market spends are going to increase because the amount of cases that you want, you now have to spend more for, and then you're going to have a low return on investment and a higher cost per acquisition. And so generally, this is what we see is people or law firms blaming marketing for what really is bad intake. Then what you have basically lower case retention, you have higher case fallout, you have lower docket values, and you have wasted internal resources and time working on bogus or really weak cases because the intake and all of this wasn't structured properly. So when we ask, who are you marketing for, everything should be built for you. And everything, you want to basically patch every hole you have so you spend less on the marketing because it's a lot less expensive to spend the money on intake than it is to spend it on all these onto marketing and throw money away. So if you fix all your intake issues and you improve your return on investment, you're going to have higher conversions. You're going to have controlled and measured marketing costs. It'll all be measured. You're going to have a lower cost per acquisition, and you're going to free up marketing budget. And the other thing you're also freeing up is your staff time by actually doing that. When you free up marketing budget, that allows you to keep on putting money back into the market to get yourself more cases because you're doing everything efficiently. It goes back to our original graph. It's talked about the product, effective marketing, and sales and intake. When all those are working together, you can keep spending because you still also have the revenue flowing to it. All right, so let's talk about campaign reporting, know where you stand. So let's talk about CRM and case management integrations. All intakes are sent directly into your system, means basically no lead loss. That means if you integrate all lead and marketing sources from calls, web forms, email, social media, chat, live transfer, doesn't matter really where the leads come from, but that's really all the sources they come from. And you basically have this push, or that's basically exported or posted or emailed, and the intake data and sign retainers is to your CRM or your case, basically your CRM or your case management software, and that goes to your staff automatically. This is how we do it. Basically, at the end of every intake, when we're done, we close the call, and everything gets posted into your account, into your case management or software system, as well as the sign retainers, whenever that's possible. And that means you never lose anything. If just an intake was done and nothing was ever signed, that's also emailed over, so you see the intake questions and the answers from the actual prospective client, even if it wasn't signed, so you can see all the data coming through. So it's all happening instantly, and that's integration to all really CRMs and case management software. And really, now we're integrating into medical review services that are third party, so they get this data right away as well. So automated reports are also sent daily. This is actually critical that you have reports. These reports show daily campaign performance. They show the total campaign performance and all the lead data. It measures marketing source and the vendor, meaning that if you're running 4 different vendors and you want to see how's each one doing and how many leads, let's say one marketing vendor is giving you 12 leads and you're converting 1, and one's giving you 6 leads and you're converting 1, but they cost the same, you obviously want to stick with the one that's 6 to 1 in a ratio that measures that. Provides data to calculate the total cost per acquisition, and it measures intake performance. It triggers intake screening adjustments, meaning that we can make, if you're not converting the high enough amount, it might be the fact that your intake screening criteria can be adjusted, and we actually coach on that. Provides detailed statuses of every lead. Provides clarity internally in your office, so you know exactly what's happening with every lead, with all different marketing vendors all at once. It's also a decision-making tool, and it really removes all the campaign mysteries that exist where you're not quite sure why a campaign's not performing with a certain vendor. And this is kind of what we call eyes wide open. So this is a campaign report that kind of shows you that basically that day, which was, this happened to be November last year, but new leads created were 5, retainers sent 2, retainers signed, not signed yet because we're following up. But for the entire campaign, there were 2,365 leads, 619 retainers sent, 510 total retainers signed, okay? And then down below, you can see all the different topics. There's never a question about what happened with every lead, and it shows why they were disqualified. There it shows the ones that were actually mailed contracts, everything. This is actually measured not just it can be measured one way, which is all leads flow into one source. We measure the entire campaign for multiple vendors, or to actually measure each marketing vendor to see basically how they're performing with their leads. Because you're using a consistent intake and you're using a consistent plan, then basically it's easier to measure and report. But this removes all the mystery. Let's talk about the numbers and how these actually work. Well, the numbers basically are looking like this. This is how optimizing the intake and all these systems drive revenue. Let's say we just take 100 leads, and we're going to improve the intake process 5%, or you're going to improve it 5% within your law firm by actually fixing all these systems. And generally, by the way, we're usually improving those 10 to 20%, and so can you, which is a lot of different leads. And if the average fee per client for PI is $12,000, and the average fee for our Tort is $120,000, and you actually improve that in just 5%, that equals $60,000 more revenue, or $600,000 increase with just 100 leads. But if it's more like 10, 15, or 20%, these are significant numbers. And intake becomes a very, very low cost equation, even when outsourcing to actually fix it. But what if it's 1,000 leads, 600,000 more for PI, or $6 million for mass tort revenue, just a 5% increase? This is why the numbers always work. If you actually fix all your intake and you have a good marketing vendors or good internal marketing, and this is all working, the amount of revenue just flows. And it just makes financial sense to make sure that all of your conversion systems, everything, all the way through intake and technology is completely fixed to get the highest return on investment. Now I want to talk about something shortly and briefly, because people ask us this all the time, and I think you just need to know our story. So one thing I just want to say is that during COVID-19, people said, well, you have 5,000 square feet, you have 425 people. How are you avoiding risk? Let's say we're going to do a very large campaign, or even a medium campaign, or a small campaign, and we send it to people. How do we know they're protected? Well, what we had to do in February 15th is make a decision, and we actually had 425 people of our staff and moved them home. And we did it over a 30-day period. Now, we had the luxury of a very high-tech team. We have 17 people here that are high-tech. We have a person that runs our IT that used to run critical infrastructure for hospitals. So we had the staff to do this, which is not easy. Also, as part of our parent company and the corporations that are out there, we're considered an essential critical infrastructure. And we actually only, even though Alert Communications only services legal, we do want to let you know that we did volunteer part of our staff to help the state of New York schedule director COVID-19 testing. That's now over, but just so you know, we did help them during that critical time period because we thought it was the right thing to do. And our parent company, even though they don't do the legal side, they support our nation's legal and law enforcement. And for us, though, but we only do the legal, and we focus on basically personal injury and mass tort. So we're fully operational during COVID-19. We actually thought that our service level was going to go down, moving people home, but it went up. We can only say that, you know, our management and processes were actually really dialed in by our management team to make sure this would actually have open communication, firewalls, security, everything. But also there's a huge benefit when there are no jobs in the marketplace, which there aren't right now. Our people want to keep their jobs, and they're working really hard to keep their jobs. So we have a security and work from home environment, really good IT management and robust technical team here. And we also basically still have our office open at the same time, you know, maintaining all the other CDC recommendations for COVID. So let's talk about this in conclusion. It's been nice talking to everybody, but let's just talk about what we have here. What we basically have is that marketing and lead generation is just part of the battle. Remember that. The first responder with the best intake wins, and this always results in the highest conversion. But it's not so simple to do, as you can see from all these things. And maybe you can do some of it in-house, or a big chunk of it in-house. But for the rest of it, you have to kind of consider, how do I make this work so I don't lose any more leads during our weakest time? Swift response times, trained intake specialists, and solid technology systems are required. So ask yourself, can you do this all in-house 24/7? If no, then consider to outsource to a strong mass tort intake team for higher conversions. And then also avoid the trap of just continually pouring money into marketing to spin through the issues that really are the intake issues. Solve the intake issues and then manage your marketing budgets better. So thank you all for your time. I basically now would like to just go over some common questions and questions that cover a lot of things. People ask us, are all your intake agents located in the USA? And the answer is yes. They're all located here. 65% of our team is also bilingual in Spanish, which solves the second question. Does your technical team collaborate with ours, which is the people in your law firm or even your marketing firm, for integrations with phone and forwarding the phones, providing the CID numbers to forward to, which are local numbers so you guys don't have long distance charges? How about the web lead, the API posting, and the criteria, and all the integrations to our CRM or case management software? And the answer is yes. Basically, we actually do all that. We have strong technical and programming team business. And do you have the current intake samples and provide intake coaching for mass torts? The answer is yes. We do walk through that. In fact, if you give us your intake, a lot of times just restructuring the questions helps them to convert a little bit more. And we help with that as well. How does the pricing and billing work? The pricing basically is a variable type pricing. We have prices that are priced per minute, pricing that are broken down in 1/10 of an increments, speaking on mass torts. But these are really customized based upon the mass torts. So we have to kind of know what it is first. We have cost per lead flat pricing that we use for mass tort. And we also have flat rates that are basically include intake and all the timing that are also exist. But all of that is dependent on the mass tort and the intake that's provided in your documents that are actually sent to us. Because we take your retainer and your intake and we put that into our systems, and we're sending out your retainer to the e-sign, and we have to look at all these documents before we would know what those rates would be for you. So we just have to get on the phone with you and talk to you. Of course, all of that is free for us to do that, and we help with all that. How long does setup take? Generally, setup for mass torts, the shortest that we have, take about 3 days. Some people have to do really complicated setups into their law offices and their CRM and case management software, which can take longer. And the reason why is we're working with their CRM or case management people as well. So generally 3 to 5 days. Most of the time it's around 5 business days to actually set you up, 3 to 5 business days. And then really long integrations, which could be for your office or for something ultra complicated, usually takes 10 business days. And then will you measure our marketing firms and help us figure out the cost per acquisition? And the answer is yes. That's what we do constantly. When people are asked for us to do that, well, we'll actually have all the valid data showing all the conversions for all the leads coming in for every single lead and the total campaign. So that was really nice to talk to everybody on the phone today. We appreciate you all joining. Remember, we're here to help you on all your campaigns or your office as well, to help actually optimize intake where you cannot have it optimized within your firm. We're here to support you. And if you want anybody's a free consultation, there's that right there. You can contact me basically direct at that phone number here, or you can email me directly. You can also go to our website, and our website with some really cool videos that are like a minute long to talk about how we assist with marketing as well as for this. So there's 3 videos, one for the law office, one for mass torts, and one for actually working with marketing firms. So feel free to check those out as well. You can also go to our website and subscribe to our blog. But basically that at this point ends our presentation here. And I believe basically that answers all the questions that we've seen here. And if you have any other questions that you feel did not get answered during this presentation, feel free just to call or email me directly, and I'll be happy to take those on for you. So we appreciate your time, and everybody have a good day. Thank you.